He did not look up when she said the words, "Please marry me." The crowd gasped. Someone laughed. Someone else cursed under their breath. But the man inside the iron cage stayed still, head lowered, chains tight around his wrists. Dust clung to his bare feet. His shoulders were wide, yet folded inward, like a man already buried. She stood inches from the bars. A stranger. A woman with nothing left to lose. If he refused, he would hang. If he accepted, she might die. So why did his silence feel like the loudest answer she had ever heard? Margaret Caldwell had not planned to beg a condemned man for marriage. 3 days earlier, the stagecoach had dropped her at the edge of Red Hollow, a dry mountain town that smelled of iron and old fear. She had arrived with one carpet bag, a handful of coins, and letters promising land, safety, and a future. The man who wrote them never came. The townspeople said he'd vanished months ago. So had her future. That was how she found herself standing in the town square, staring at an iron cage, baking under the afternoon sun. 8 feet tall, thick bars, a warning made of metal. Inside it sat the mountain man everyone whispered about. They called him a beast. They said he killed a rancher up in the high country. Said he lived in a cave. Said he stopped speaking years ago after something terrible happened. Said it took 6 men to drag him down from the mountains in chains. Margaret did not see a beast. She saw stillness, the kind that came after pain had burned everything else away. "How long's he been in there?" she asked. 3 weeks, someone replied. "Sheriff's waiting on the circuit judge." "And until then?" The man shrugged. "He waits. Waits to die." The sun beat down. The iron bars shimmered with heat. Margaret felt it on her own skin and imagined what it must feel like trapped inside that cage all day. No shade. No mercy. She stepped closer. A woman beside her hissed, "Don't. He nearly bit a man's finger off." Margaret ignored her. The man's clothes were torn, hanging loose on a frame that once carried strength. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tangled and dusty. His head stayed bowed, but she could see the marks on his wrists. Shackles rubbed raw, old scars layered beneath new ones. This was not the posture of an animal. It was the posture of grief. "Move along," Sheriff Cole Hartman barked as he noticed her. "You've had your look." "Is he fed?" Margaret asked. The sheriff frowned. "Of course. We're not savages." "And water?" "Yes. Now step back." She didn't. "What's his crime?" she asked. "Not the rumors." "The truth." Hartman's jaw tightened. "He killed Luke Brenner, found him standing over the body, blood on his hands." "Any witnesses?" "No." "Was it self-defense?" "Doesn't matter," the sheriff snapped. "Luke Brenner was a respected man." Margaret swallowed. She had heard those words before. Respected men had shot her husband in the back for his land. The law had shrugged then too. "What happens to him?" she asked. "Judge will hang him." The words settled heavy in her chest. She reached into her carpet bag and touched the small cloth bundle inside. The last thing of value she owned. A gold wedding ring from a marriage buried in Ohio soil. She pulled it out. The gold caught the light. "I want to make you a proposition," she said. The sheriff blinked. "Ma'am?" Margaret turned to the crowd. "You believe in law, in justice?" Murmurs. Uneasy agreement. "Then you must believe in mercy, too." Someone laughed. Another spat. She raised the ring. "I will marry him." Silence hit the square like a gunshot. Then the laughter came, loud, cruel. "You're touched in the head. He'll kill her by nightfall. She won't last a mile." Margaret didn't move. She looked at the man in the cage. For the first time, he lifted his head. Gray eyes met hers through the bars, storm-colored, deep, not wild, just tired, so very tired. "I'm of sound mind," she said clearly, "and I know what I'm offering. If he's the monster you say, then I'll bear the risk. But if he's not, and you hang him anyway, that blood belongs to all of you." "You don't even know his name," the sheriff said. Neither do you, Margaret replied. The crowd shifted. Unease crept in. She stepped closer to the cage, close enough that he could reach her if he wanted. He didn't. I don't know your story, she said softly, only to him. But I know loneliness, and I know what it means to be judged without being heard. She held up the ring. This is all I have. It's not much, but it's freely given. The man stared at the ring. Then slowly he nodded. A single motion, small, certain. Margaret turned back to the sheriff. He's agreed. I can't just... Yes, you can, she said. You've held him without trial. I'm removing him from your town as my lawful husband. Or you can explain to the circuit judge why you denied a woman her legal right to marry. The sheriff's face flushed red. The crowd pressed closer, angry, conflicted. An old man stepped forward, leaning on a cane. Judge Eli Turner. Retired but not powerless. I've heard enough, he said. Sheriff, open the cage. You can't be serious. I am. The keys rattled. The cage door creaked open. The man stepped out slowly, bare feet on dust, chains clinking. He moved like someone who had learned not to frighten others. Margaret stood beside him. I, Margaret Caldwell, she said, voice steady. Take this man as my lawful husband. The judge cleared his throat. And you, son, do you consent? The man lifted his shackled hands and pressed his palms together once. It's consent enough, the judge said. By the authority of this territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Margaret slid the ring onto his smallest finger. It barely fit. Now leave, the sheriff growled. Both of you. They walked, out of Red Hollow, out of fear, into the open road. Behind them, whispers followed like dust. Ahead lay only mountains, silence, and the man she had just married without knowing his name. Margaret did not look back. But she wondered, had she just saved a life, or tied her own to something far more dangerous than the gallows? They walked until Red Hollow disappeared behind dust and distance. Margaret did not stop until her legs burned and her breath came shallow. Only then did she turn. The town was gone. The iron cage, the shouting, the laughter, all of it swallowed by the empty road. She exhaled. Beside her, the man stood silently. Chains still circled his wrists. Her ring glinted on his finger, awkward and small. He kept a careful distance, as if unsure whether freedom was real or only another trick. Can you walk? She asked. He nodded once and gestured down the road. Lead the way. They followed a wagon trail toward the mountains. The sun dipped low, painting the land gold and rust. Margaret's carpetbag grew heavier with each step. Her boots were worn thin, never meant for distance like this. Behind her, the soft clink of chains marked every footfall. It followed her like a heartbeat. When darkness thickened and the road grew uneven, Margaret stopped near a cluster of juniper trees. We'll camp here, she said. The man hesitated, then moved without a word. Despite the shackles, he gathered dry branches quickly, choosing each piece with care. He arranged them in a neat circle, larger logs beneath, kindling above. Someone who knew fire. Margaret watched, surprised. She reached for her matches, but he was already striking stones together. Sparks caught. A flame bloomed. Warmth pushed back the cold. You've done this before, she said. He glanced up briefly, then back to the fire. She laid out what little food she had. Hard bread, dried beef, half a canteen of water. He took only small portions until she pushed more toward him. They ate in silence. Afterward, he rose and disappeared into the dark brush. Fear flickered in her chest. Then he returned, cupping prickly pear fruit in his hands. Carefully cleaned. Offered without words. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Margaret pulled out her sewing kit. Your clothes are falling apart. I can mend them. He hesitated, then turned his side toward her. She worked carefully, aware of his tension. Beneath the torn fabric, old scars crossed his ribs. Deep, jagged. You've survived a lot, she said softly. His shoulders shifted. Agreement, maybe, As she stitched, she found herself speaking. The firelight made honesty easier. "My first husband was killed over land," she said. "Shot from behind. The law did nothing." He listened. "I sold everything after that," answered a letter that promised a new start, a bitter smile. "Instead, I found you in a cage." She tied off the thread. "There, it'll hold." He examined her work, then reached for her carpetbag. The handle was tearing loose. With careful precision, he reworked the stitching, using his teeth to hold the leather while his bound hands pulled the thread tight. "You know leatherwork," she said. He paused, then showed his palms, thick calluses, tool-worn hands. "A farrier?" she guessed. A partial nod. Metal and horses. When he finished, the handle was stronger than before. He tested it twice before handing it back. "Fair trade," he gestured. She smiled faintly. "I suppose it is." The cold deepened. Margaret unfolded her single blanket. "We'll share," she said. He shook his head firmly and curled himself near the fire, arms wrapped tight despite the chains. "That's foolish," she said. "We're married, strange as that is." Quote. Slowly, he moved to the edge of the blanket, his back to her, taking as little space as possible. She pulled the blanket over both of them. The chains rattled softly as he shifted. Without thinking, she touched his shoulder. He flinched violently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to startle you." He lay still, breathing carefully. Then, slowly, he relaxed beneath her hand. "Tomorrow, we'll remove those shackles," she promised. A soft exhale answered her. They lay under the stars, strangers bound by law and desperation. Somewhere, a coyote howled. The sound felt honest. "Jacob," she whispered, choosing the name she'd given him. "I don't expect anything from this marriage. If you leave once you're free, I won't stop you." Silence stretched. Then he shifted and pressed his palms together once more, a promise. Morning came pale and cold. Margaret woke to find the blanket tucked around her and Jacob gone. Panic surged until she spotted him near the fire, grinding stone against metal. He'd been working on the shackles. Blood marked his wrists. "Let me help," she said. He shook his head. "At least let me tend the wounds." After a pause, he held out his hands. She cleaned the raw skin gently. Up close, she saw burns and scars layered deep. The hands of a craftsman. A builder. When she finished, he returned to his work. By full sunrise, one shackle snapped open. Then the other. He stared at his freed wrists as if unsure what to do with them. Suddenly, he lifted the chains and smashed them against a rock. Again. Again. Metal bent. Rage burned through each strike. Then he hurled the twisted iron into a ravine. The sound echoed. He turned back calmer, breathing steady. "Better?" she asked. He nodded. They walked on. By midday, the land changed. Pines replaced scrub. The trail climbed. Margaret stumbled more than once. Jacob stopped her gently and pointed to her boots. He disappeared briefly and returned with strips of soft bark. He wrapped her feet before helping her back into the boots. The pain eased. "Thank you," she said. He inclined his head. They rounded a bend, and Margaret froze. Below lay the valley from the letters. Creek. Bottomland. Shelter from the wind. But no house. No cabin, she whispered. He never built it. Jacob studied the valley, then pointed. Near the creek. Half hidden. A dugout shelter. Abandoned. Unfinished. Inside. Dirt floor. Half-framed roof. Stones waiting for purpose. He started, she said weakly. "That's something." Jacob tested the supports, thoughtful, then looked at her and made a building gesture. "With what?" she asked. "I have $17 and no tools." He wiggled his fingers, then gestured to the land. "Skills, materials. You'd help me build?" He nodded. She swallowed. "All right, we'll try." His rare smile flickered, brief and surprised. Then it faded. He stared at the shelter, hands trembling. He drew a line across his throat, pointed to himself, covered his face. Understanding struck her. "You built before," she said softly, "and it ended in death." He nodded. "Your family?" "Barely." She stepped closer, careful. "It doesn't have to be the same." He looked at her for a long moment, then picked up a stick and began drawing again. Plans. Simple. Strong. Hope. Sketched in dirt. But as the sun lowered, Margaret felt the weight of what lay ahead. She had married a man of silence and scars. And the mountains were not done testing either of them yet. The first night inside the half-built shelter felt heavier than the open road. The dirt floor held the days cold. Winds slipped through the gaps in the unfinished roof. The fire Jacob built burned steady but small, as if he feared using too much of anything. Margaret laid pine needles where they would sleep and spread the blanket over them. The shelter smelled of earth and fresh-cut wood. Not home, but not nothing. Jacob stayed near the entrance, sitting with his back to the wall, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. "You don't have to keep watch," she said gently. "No one followed us." He didn't answer. She understood anyway. Some dangers lived inside. They ate quietly, what little food remained. When the fire burned down to embers, Margaret lay back and stared through the open roof at the stars. They felt closer here, sharper. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll start clearing the roof beams. If we're careful, we can make it hold." Jacob shifted. He picked up a stick and smoothed the dirt. With practiced movements, he sketched a frame, angles, support points. He showed her where stone should go, where wood would last longest. "You are more than a farrier," she said quietly. He paused. Then he added details to the drawing. Decorative touches, curves meant for beauty, not function. "You were an artist." He erased the drawing with his palm. The silence that followed felt heavy with memory. Margaret did not push. Morning brought frost and pale sunlight. They worked without words. Jacob showed her how to brace beams with stone, how to test wood for weakness, how to listen to the land. By midday, the shelter felt stronger. Then, everything changed. Jacob froze mid-step, staring at the creek. His hands clenched. Margaret followed his gaze and saw it. Rope marks carved into an old cottonwood. Weathered, faded. Someone had been hanged there once. Jacob staggered back as if struck. He covered his face, breath coming fast. The careful calm she had seen since Red Hollow shattered. "Jacob," she said softly. He dropped to his knees. With shaking hands, he picked up stones from the creek bed. One large, two small. He placed them carefully. A family. Then more stones. Many. Surrounding them, he made stabbing motions with a stick. Raiders. He scattered the small stones violently, covered them with dirt. His shoulders shook. Margaret knelt beside him. "Your children," she whispered. He nodded once. Hard. Then he pointed to the shelter, made a building motion, then drew his finger across his throat. "They tried to hang you," she said slowly, "after you tried to build again." Another nod, because grief scared them. His silence confirmed it. Margaret felt tears fall, but she did not wipe them away. "You survived more than anyone should," she said. "That doesn't make you cursed." Jacob pressed his palms into the dirt, then slowly stood and turned back toward the shelter. He picked up the stick again. This time, his hand was steadier. They worked until dusk. Not fast, not perfect, but together. That night, the fire burned brighter. Margaret noticed Jacob no longer sat at the entrance. He settled closer, not touching, but near enough that the blanket brushed his arm. Progress, she thought, came in inches. The next weeks followed a rhythm. Work at sunrise, gathering stone, cutting timber. Jacob taught her everything patiently. How to angle a roof against snow. How to set a hearth so smoke would draw clean. Margaret learned quickly. They spoke little. But communication found its way through gestures, shared glances, quiet understanding. One afternoon, a traveling peddler passed through the valley. Jacob repaired his broken wheel without asking payment. In return, they received an old mule, stubborn, slow, alive. It felt like a gift from the world. With the mule came a problem. Supplies. They needed nails. A saw. Salt. Flour. Town. Margaret watched Jacob grow tense as she spoke the word. "We'll go together," she said. "We won't stay long." He nodded, though his jaw tightened. The town of Cedar Falls sat a day's ride north. Smaller than Red Hollow. Louder. Busier. They entered at midday. Eyes followed them. Whispers moved faster than feet. "That's her. The woman who married the mountain man." Jacob kept his head down, hands visible, movements careful. At the general store, the owner hesitated until Margaret placed coins on the counter. "We'll pay," she said. "Fair price." That seemed to settle it. Outside, a wagon overturned in the street. A man trapped beneath. Panic erupted. Before Margaret could speak, Jacob moved. He directed men with sharp gestures, positioned planks, coordinated the lift. The wagon rose. The man was freed. Relief washed through the crowd. Someone clapped Jacob's shoulder. "Good thinking." Jacob stepped back, uncomfortable, but something had shifted. For a moment he was not feared. Then a voice cut through the street. "Well, look what crawled into town." Marcus Brenner, brother of the man Jacob killed. 3 riders blocked the road. Jacob stepped in front of Margaret without hesitation. "We want no trouble," she said. "Trouble already happened," Marcus replied, hand resting on his gun. "My brother's dead." Quote, "It was self-defense," Margaret said. Jacob stood silent. "Convenient," Marcus sneered. "A man who won't speak." Jacob reached into his shirt and pulled out a small carved horse, worn smooth, a child's toy. He held it up, then pressed it to his chest. Marcus faltered. "He lost his children," Margaret said quietly. "He knows grief." The moment stretched. Finally, Marcus lowered his hand. "Get out of my sight," he said roughly, "and don't come back." They left Cedar Falls without another word. The road home felt longer. That night, Jacob sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The carved horse rested in his palm. Margaret sat beside him. Close. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, hoarse and broken, a word escaped his throat. "Home." The sound startled them both. Margaret smiled through tears. "Yes," she said, "this can be home." Jacob nodded, and in the quiet that followed, the shelter felt less like a reminder of loss, and more like the beginning of something that might finally stay. Winter came early in the high country. The first snow dusted the valley like a warning. Thin at first, then heavier. Jacob worked longer hours after that, his movements urgent but steady. He reinforced the roof beams, sealed gaps with mud and pine pitch, and set stones so tight the wind gave up, trying to push through. Margaret did her part. She hauled water, gathered needles for bedding, learned to split wood without wasting strength. At night, her hands ached, but the fire burned warm, and the walls held. It was enough. One evening, as snow tapped softly against the roof, Jacob brought her a flat stone. On it, he had drawn with charcoal. Not plans this time. A woman standing beside a cabin, smoke rising behind her. Margaret touched the drawing. "That's me." Jacob nodded. "And this is home," she said. His mouth opened, closed. Then, slowly, carefully, he spoke. "Yes." The word was rough, broken by years of silence. But it was a word. She didn't praise him, didn't rush him. She only smiled and went back to stirring the stew. Some things needed room to grow. They had been married nearly 3 months when necessity forced another trip to Cedar Falls. Winter supplies. Margaret saw the tension return to Jacob's shoulders as they loaded the mule. He checked the straps twice, scanned the ridge lines. "We'll be careful," she said. He nodded. The town looked different this time. Fewer stares, fewer whispers. At the general store, the owner greeted them with a nod. "Mrs. Stone." The name still surprised her. Jacob lingered near the tools, eyes drawn to iron like it called to him. A broken cane caught his attention. He repaired it without being asked. then a bent hinge, then a cracked skillet. The store owner watched quietly. "You're good with your hands," he said. Jacob shrugged. "I could use help," the man continued. "Lifting, repairs, 3 days a week." Margaret held her breath. Jacob glanced at her, question in his eyes. "It's your choice," she said softly. He nodded. Work gave him something new. Purpose without fear. In town, people began to see what she had seen from the start. A craftsman, a careful man, not a monster. One afternoon, a freight wagon overturned near the livery. Chaos erupted. Jacob ran toward it. He directed men with firm gestures, used leverage, calm. The trap driver was freed before serious harm could set in. Hands clapped his back. "Good work!" For the first time, Jacob did not flinch. That night, back at the cabin, he spoke again. Just a few words. They listened. "They saw you," Margaret replied. He sat quietly after that, staring into the fire. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "My name before." She waited. "Josiah." The name hung between them. "Do you want me to use it?" she asked. He shook his head. "That man died." She nodded. "Then Jacob stays." Winter settled fully after that. Snow piled high. Days shortened. The cabin held. One morning, a knock came at their door. A doctor stood outside, supporting a young woman heavy with child. Her face was pale with pain. "Her wagon broke," the doctor said. "Storm's coming." Margaret stepped aside immediately. "Bring her in." Jacob stoked the fire without being asked, boiled water, laid out clean cloths. The hours that followed were long and hard. Margaret worked beside the doctor, steady hands, quiet voice. Jacob stood nearby, offering support where needed. Holding, lifting, listening. The woman screamed, then cried, then laughed through tears. A baby girl was born strong and loud. Relief filled the cabin. Jacob stared at the child as if seeing something sacred. When the doctor asked him to hold her, while he tended the mother, Jacob hesitated only a moment. Then he cradled the infant carefully, reverently. Tears ran freely down his face. That night, Margaret found him sitting by the fire, the baby asleep in his arms. "She trusts you," Margaret said. He swallowed. "I remember this weight." "Tell me," she said gently, and he did. Halting words, broken sentences. A wife lost in childbirth. 2 children taken by raiders. A town that feared his grief. A rope around his neck. Silence as survival. Margaret listened, did not interrupt. When he finished, the fire had burned low. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "I know," he replied. Then quieter. "Some days." Quote, "The family stayed until the storm passed. Before they left, Jacob brought out something he had been building in secret. A cradle. Smooth, carved, beautiful," Margaret gasped. "It's perfect." "For the baby," he said, then paused. "Or someday." Her chest tightened. They stood in the doorway as the family rode away, gratitude heavy in the air. That night, Jacob spoke again. "Thank you for seeing me." She reached for his hand. He did not pull away. Spring would come. Work would continue. The world would test them again. But for the first time, Margaret believed this place could hold more than survival. It could hold a life. And Jacob, once caged and feared, stood beside her, free, seen, and slowly finding his voice again. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly like a shy guest unsure of welcome. Snow melted in narrow streams. Grass pushed through damp soil. The valley breathed again. With it came work. Jacob left for Cedar Falls 3 mornings each week. He rose before dawn, checking the sky, the mule, the trail. Margaret always walked with him to the edge of the trees. "I'll be back before dark," he said one morning. His words still came carefully, but they came. "I know," she replied. "I'll have supper waiting." He nodded, then hesitated, leaned forward and brushed his forehead lightly against hers. An awkward gesture, tender, real. She watched until he disappeared down the trail. The days alone were quiet, but not lonely. Margaret tended a small garden near the creek. Turnips, beans, a stubborn patch of corn. She patched clothing, cleaned the cabin, and learned the rhythm of the land. At night, she listened for Jacob's footsteps. They always came. In Cedar Falls, Jacob's presence changed things. People stopped whispering, started asking, "Could you fix this hinge, that wheel, this broken stove?" Jacob did not smile much, but he worked with steady focus. His hands remembered what his voice still struggled with. Respect grew quietly around them. One afternoon, the store owner approached him with an envelope. $1.50 a day, he said, and something extra. Inside was a folded notice, a job request from a nearby ranch. New forge, horseshoeing, fence work. Jacob stared at it a long time. That evening, he showed it to Margaret. "They want you to build again," she said. He nodded. Fear flickered behind his eyes. "We don't have to," she added quickly. He looked at the cabin. The valley, the half-built corral waiting patiently for hands. "I want to," he said, "but slow." She smiled. "Slow is good." They began together. Jacob built a small forge near the shed. Nothing grand. Stone, clay, careful spacing. He tested it twice before lighting the first fire. When iron glowed again beneath his hammer, something settled in him. Margaret watched from the doorway. The rhythm of metal felt like a heartbeat returning. One evening, as the sun dipped low, riders appeared on the ridge. Jacob stiffened. 3 men, armed. Margaret stepped beside him without thinking. They approached slowly. "Evening," the lead rider called. "We're not here for trouble." Jacob didn't move. The man dismounted. "Name's Caleb Wright. We heard there's a smith out this way." Jacob nodded once. "We lost tools in a flood. Need repairs." Margaret held her breath. Jacob gestured toward the forge. The men exchanged glances, then relaxed slightly. They stayed an hour, paid fairly, thanked him, rode away without incident. When they were gone, Jacob sank onto a log, breathing hard. "You did it," Margaret said softly. He wiped sweat from his brow. "Didn't run." "No," she said. "You stood." That night he slept deeply, dreamless. Summer followed, the valley filled with sound, birds, insects, the steady ring of hammer on iron. Margaret's garden flourished. She canned what she could, learned to trade eggs and repairs for flour and sugar when travelers passed through. Sometimes children came with their parents, curious, wide-eyed. Jacob carved small wooden animals while the iron cooled, birds, horses, bears. He gave them away freely. One little boy asked, "Why don't you talk much?" Quote. Jacob crouched to his level, thought for a long moment. "My words were tired," he said finally. The boy nodded as if this made perfect sense. That evening, Margaret laughed softly by the fire. "You did well." He shrugged. "He didn't fear me." "No," she said. "He saw you." Late one afternoon, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the valley. Sheriff Hartman. Margaret's stomach tightened. Jacob stood slowly, hammer lowering. The sheriff dismounted, hands visible. "I won't stay long," he said. "Just came to pass through." Silence stretched. "I heard you've been working," Hartman continued, "helping folks." Jacob said nothing. Hartman cleared his throat. "I was wrong." The words landed heavy. "I let fear decide for me," the sheriff said. "That cage shouldn't have happened." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I don't expect forgiveness," Hartman added. "Just wanted to say it." Margaret spoke then. "Thank you for coming." The sheriff nodded, mounted up, and rode away. Jacob stared at the empty trail long after. "Does it help?" Margaret asked gently. He shook his head. "But it closes something." They sat together until the sun dipped behind the peaks. That night, Jacob reached for her hand in the dark. Not tentative, certain. She turned toward him. Their foreheads touched. Breath mingled. When they kissed, it was slow, careful, as if both were learning the shape of trust for the first time. No rush, no taking, only choosing. The days that followed felt different. Easier. Jacob spoke more. Not much, but enough. Margaret found herself humming while she worked, a habit she hadn't noticed returning. One evening, Jacob placed the carved cradle near the bed. "For later," he said quietly. She touched it gently. "If it happens," she said, "we'll welcome it." He nodded, relief softening his face. But peace, she knew, was never permanent. One morning, Jacob returned from town later than usual. His face was pale, jaw tight. "What is it?" she asked. "There's talk," he said. "Men coming through, claim disputes, someone asking about this valley." Her heart sank. "Do they know about us?" He hesitated. "Not yet." They stood in the doorway, staring out at the land they had bled for, built with patience, with scars. Margaret reached for his hand. "Whatever comes," she said, "we face it together." Jacob squeezed her fingers. Hard. The valley lay quiet. Too quiet. And somewhere beyond the ridges, decisions were being made that might test everything they had fought to build. The trouble did not arrive with shouting or gunfire. It came quietly. One morning, Jacob returned from Cedar Falls with his mule sweating hard and his eyes darker than Margaret had ever seen them. "They filed papers," he said. "Claim papers?" Her chest tightened. "For this land?" He nodded. "3 men, back east money. Never set foot here." Margaret stepped outside and looked across the valley. The creek, the cabin, the forge, every stone they had lifted with sore hands. "They can't just take it," she said. "They can," Jacob replied. "Law says papers matter more than work." Silence stretched between them. Margaret felt the old fear rise, the same one she had felt in Ohio. Respectable men, paper justice, guns waiting behind smiles. "We won't run," she said. Jacob looked at her sharply. "We didn't build this to lose it," she continued. "Not again." He exhaled slowly. "Then we stand." 2 days later, the riders came, not angry, not loud. 3 men in clean coats, well-fed horses, polite eyes that never softened. "We're here to inspect the claim," the tallest said. "You'll need to vacate within the month." Jacob stepped forward, jaw set. Margaret spoke first. "We've been living here, building, improving the land." The man smiled thinly. "Doesn't matter. You have no registered deed." Jacob's hands clenched, then he released them. "Give us time," he said, clear, steady, "to present evidence." The men exchanged glances. "You have 1 week," the tallest replied. "After that, we return with enforcement." They rode away. Margaret's knees weakened once they were gone. Jacob caught her. That night, they did not sleep. "What proof do we have?" she asked. Jacob stared into the fire, then stood abruptly and went to the shed. He returned with a small box. Inside were old tools, a branding iron, a scrap of parchment, letters. He laid them out carefully. "My first home," he said, "built here, years ago, before everything." Margaret picked up the paper. The writing was faint but legible. A receipt, supplies purchased, location marked. "This land was yours," she whispered. He nodded. "I left. After. Fear, grief, silence. But the work," she said slowly. "The forge, the improvements, witnesses." He looked up. "Cedar Falls." They rode at dawn. The town gathered slowly, curious, watchful. Margaret spoke to the store owner, the ranchers, the doctor, men whose wagons Jacob had repaired, whose tools he had saved. "He built here before," she said, "and now again. With his hands, with his labor." Murmurs grew. Then Sheriff Hartman stepped forward. "I'll testify," he said gruffly. "That man was caged without cause and freed by law." The circuit judge arrived 3 days later. Papers were laid out. Witnesses spoke. Jacob stood silent until the judge looked at him. "Do you have anything to say?" Jacob swallowed. "Yes," he said. The word held the room. I lost my family, he continued, voice rough but unbroken. I lost my voice. But I did not lose my right to live. Silence. The judge nodded slowly. The claim stands, he ruled, by labor, by residence, by testimony. Quote, the men in clean coats left without another word. Margaret felt her legs give way. Jacob caught her. That night, the valley felt different, lighter. They sat by the fire, the decision settling into their bones. You spoke, Margaret said softly. He nodded. Because it mattered. Weeks passed. Summer edged toward autumn. One evening, Margaret stood at the creek longer than usual. Her hand rested on her stomach. Jacob noticed. You're quiet, he said. She turned to him. Tears shone in her eyes. I think, she whispered, we're not alone anymore. Understanding dawned slowly on his face, then wonder, then fear, then something stronger than all three. Hope. He reached for her, hands trembling, and pressed his forehead to hers. We'll be ready, he said. She smiled through tears. Together. The cradle was moved closer to the bed that night. Winter came again, but this time it did not feel threatening. The cabin stood strong. Smoke curled steady from the chimney. Neighbors stopped by. Children laughed near the forge. Jacob carved one last wooden horse. He placed it in the cradle. Margaret watched him from the doorway, heart full. Months ago he had been caged, feared, silent. Now he was a husband, a builder, a man seen. And she had come west with nothing but desperation. Together, they had built everything. As snow began to fall again, Jacob took Margaret's hand and looked out across their land. Thank you, he said quietly, for asking me. She smiled. For answering. And in the quiet valley, where fear once ruled, a family began. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Archives of the Wild West, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.